For anybody who is asking for the Zoom link, you can direct people to the LinkedIn event page where the Zoom link is filled out. If during the presentation you have a question that you definitely want answered, just drop it down into the chat box, and then either through the presentation we'll get to it, or all the way at the end we'll address those questions one at a time.
Okay, perfect. All right, so I'm going to get started. Thank you for joining today, Leah. I really just wanted to put this together to learn more about the remote cooling tower audits and get some information that we can provide to the public. New York City has always had some complicated building compliance standards, and of course, with these inspections being performed virtually rather than in person, it's made the whole process a little more complicated and difficult. So just to set the agenda for this presentation, we're going to go through this step by step. I'm going to ask you various questions on these inspections. And to let everyone know, we put together a transcript and an action plan for this call for reference, so we'll send that out after the webinar is completed. And as Chris mentioned, if you have any questions throughout, just feel free to drop that into the chat, and we can either go over that during or after the presentation. So Leah, I'm glad that we're presenting on this today. I know you have a lot of information to share with us.
Thanks, Maggie. Thank you everyone for joining us. You know, when we were, I believe it was back in June, presented with the first email that was requesting, you know, this remote inspection, it caught us a little bit off guard, and we certainly have answered a bunch of these in the time since. Judging just on the amount of you know, feedback we've gotten for participants on this webinar and also requests for the follow-up action plan, it's definitely a topic that there's some unknown and uncertainty. We're going to give you as much insight as we can into exactly what this looks like and how you're going to respond to this remote audit. One word I did want to mention for any of our existing Vitralogy customers, this is part of our service agreement with you. You should have by now received an email from me letting you know what to expect, but basically it's just, you know, when you receive this email from the DOH, forward it over to myself, to support@vitralogy.com. We're going to be collecting all of this information and submitting on your behalf. So not to worry for, you know, for our existing customers. So let's dive in, Maggie.
Perfect. So to start off, what is a remote cooling tower audit?
So a remote cooling tower audit is in lieu of an in-person inspection. So in response to COVID, back in March, the DOH halted all in-person inspections. They just, they call them field scientists, the inspectors that go on site. So typically you would expect at least once a year, a DOH inspector to come on site and to audit your operational records. Since they were not able to send people on site, they put some of that onus on the building owner. And essentially what you're doing is you are recreating all of your operational records. You're taking that binder, you're formatting it in the way that they're asking you to. You're submitting it to the DOH, and then they are going to go ahead and do the conduct the inspection remotely off-site, off of the records that they have received from you.
And who actually gets inspected, and when will my building be inspected?
So the when is a little bit of an unknown. I'll be honest, we've tried to find out like a rhyme or reason to it. You know, they are coming in fast and furious. It seems to be typically on a Monday or a Tuesday that you'll receive this request. But we haven't figured out yet what their formula is. It's certainly open to every building that has a cooling tower. You can expect to receive one of these email inspection requests. We have had situations where we've got 4 buildings on the same city block. We've received an inspection for one. We were curious to see, does that mean that the next, you know, the neighbors are going to get the inspection requests? Hasn't necessarily happened. We've also had scenarios where there's been a property manager that has 4 buildings with cooling towers assigned to them. They received notification of an inspection request for one, not necessarily for the others. So the when is a little bit of an unknown, but know that they are coming, and it's a random process.
Okay, so it seems pretty at random.
Yeah. So let's dive into the who, though. So who actually is receiving this request? Your first point for your follow-up action plan, before you even receive this initial email, we want you to get familiar with your New York City cooling tower registration page. So there's a link over here to the registration portal. Again, we're going to send you out an action plan. The links are going to be in the action plan, but you're going to want to take a look at the building information page of your New York City registry. And you'll see on the bottom there, owner. So the name and the email address associated with the owner is the person who will actually be receiving the inspection request. So very important, if you have an employee that is no longer with your company, if the email is not up to date, you won't even know that you're being inspected, and you're going to end up with violations. So step one is to get onto this New York City cooling tower registry and take a look at the information that's in there. Make sure that it's up to date, and make sure that the person who is assigned as the owner is actually the person that you want to be the point person that's receiving the inspection request.
So the person listed as the owner will be receiving it. Are they also the one responsible for answering, or is that something the vendor is doing?
So the vendor is not going to answer this for you. That's not part of their scope. You can have somebody answer on your behalf, but again, this is the person that's going to be receiving that initial request. If it's a Vitralogy customer, please send that over to us when you receive it. If you are collaborating with somebody, it doesn't necessarily have to be the person whose email is here. It doesn't have to come from that particular email. The important thing to note is that that's the person who will be receiving the inspection request.
Okay, and what documentation are they looking for, and how far back do I go?
Okay, so why don't we take a look at the initial email that you're going to receive from the DOH. I know that you get correspondence from the DOH, fairly regularly, specifically from the CT has a number of emails that they send things to you. This is something that you are going to want to keep an eye out for. If you get an email from DOH that has CT inspection, the subject line, excuse me, is going to say 2021 cooling tower inspection. Pay attention to this. Take a look, because this is your notification that you are now on the clock and you have 7 days to answer this inspection request. So let's go into this email a little bit, because there's some important information that you're going to take out of this email that you're going to need to fill out the audit form and to start understanding what your attachments that you're submitting are going to be. So on the top here, it's giving you the building address and the bin number. Keep in mind that this is an inspection request for one single building. So if you are a property manager that has, multiple buildings with cooling towers, and you are the registered owner for each of those, they are only asking you for this particular building. They will send you a separate email request for each building. We've seen a scenario where a property manager has submitted for, multiple buildings, and that was sent back saying, nope, you jumped the gun. We weren't asking for other sites. We're only asking for this particular building. So they will provide you with the building address, the bin number. They're also going to give you the cooling tower system ID number. That's that number there that starts with the number 2. When you respond to the email, when you're actually submitting your inspection package, the subject line, they're going to ask you to include your cooling tower system ID number. They're providing it for you, and that's right here. Okay. And the last thing in this top section here that's really important to take note of is the DOH is going to provide you with the date of the last inspection. So the last time that this particular building was inspected was in November of 2019. This is really important to note because the records that you're submitting are going to go all the way back to the date of the last inspection. So notice it's not a calendar year, it's not a cooling tower season. They are asking you to go all the way back. In this case, it's November. We've seen it where it's been, June of 2019. And in that case, you're giving them all the records for 2020 and half of the records from 2019. So as soon as you receive this email, take note of that last inspection date because that's the date that you're going off of. Okay. We're going to give you a little bit more information about, what this actual inspection is. They're telling you it's a remote audit of the cooling tower operational records, and then they explain how the process works. When you receive this email, it's going to have two attachments attached to it, and we're going to dive into those. Attachment A is the form that you're going to fill out, and it's going to lay out every single piece of information that they're expecting to receive from you. So that's the part we're really going to go into depth. That attachment A, they're giving you the due date there in red. You can see that this email was received February 24th. You have 7 days to respond, and they're telling you that they need this back by March 3rd. It is 7 calendar days, not business days, so weekends count. And then the second attachment is attachment B. We'll go over that at the end. You actually have 60 days to return attachment B, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. They're also going to tell you that the records that you're scanning and aggregating, they would like in a specific format. We have standardized all of our submissions are submitted as PDFs. I'm going to show you what that looks like and how we organize that and how what each PDF should be labeled as, and then what each PDF needs to include. And then they're telling you, again, in bold, make sure that your cooling tower system ID number is in the subject line when you return this packet. And again, that system ID number is in the top of the email that they send you.
So a lot to take note on for this email.
Yeah, we're going to take it step by step, but this is the actual email. This is what they're going to send you. On first glance, it's like, okay, they're looking for an audit form. Yes, they're looking for the audit form and all the corresponding records. So essentially, what you're doing is, again, you are recreating that on-site binder, and you're submitting it to the Department of Health so they can conduct this inspection.
Okay. And can we take a look at attachment A?
Sure can. Okay. So attachment A will come with that initial inspection request email. It's going to come in blank. The things that you see filled out in red are things that we actually, populated and filled out here. So on the top, it's going to give you, again, instructions on what they're looking for. And we're going to take this, piece by piece. You're going to have to fill out attachment A. And again, you're going to have to then create separate PDFs. So what I'd like to do, Chris, if you can give an example, I'm going to start at the end and I'm going to show you what a final submission email looks like. So in response to, that email inspection request, this is what we're sending back to them. We're going to send, if you can scroll up, Chris, to the top of that email. So it's coming from us, and we're submitting it to the email address provided, and in the subject line, we're giving that system ID number that they had asked for, and letting them know that this is the virtual inspection submission for this building address. So there are a lot of attachments here. This is ultimately what it's going to look like. Attachment A is one of the attachments. That's that they sent it to us. We fill it out and we send it back. But then we break down each of these categories and we create a separate PDF. The naming convention there is, as you see it, is going to follow the category that they're asking you for on the attachment A. So A2, A3, A4, the label, and then we put the building address as well. So this is the final, what it's going to look like after you collect all that data. This is how they would like it submitted back to them.
And you're responding directly to that initial email.
So that's what we've done. We've taken that initial email and we've just replied to it. But it's yeah, and we've changed the subject line to include the system ID number there.
Great.
Okay, so let's go back to attachment A. I know it's a lot. We're going to take it step by step, and hopefully it won't be as painful as it seems. Okay, so you're going to fill in your building address. You're going to fill in your system ID number, which they've provided you with. And next they're asking you for the equipment ID number. The equipment ID number always starts with 1. It's a 1 million number. You are going to find that number on that New York City registry portal. So again, action plan, get to know your registry portal. That's where you're going to find the equipment ID number. Okay, the very first thing they're giving you is an option out, a certification of non-operation. If your cooling tower is decommissioned, if that building is completely vacant, very important though, it might be vacant now, but it may have run earlier in the season, or it may have run in 2019 and your date of last inspection was June of 2019 and you didn't shut that cooling tower down until 2020, you're still going to have to provide records while it was running. But if it's not running, it has not been running, you can simply certify that you do not have to complete this because the cooling tower has not operated. In that case, you would just check this off, you would sign and certify and return this on the off chance. Okay. So the first category here, A1, is the maintenance program and plan, known as the MPP. This is that binder that's on site that your water treater or your environmental consultant has prepared for you. You are checking here the yes box. You're certifying that the building does in fact have that MPP on site. This is what would need to be available if the inspector were to come on site. This is the thing that they would be looking at. They are asking you to just fill out the date that the MPP was prepared, and then also the name and company of the person who prepared that MPP. We have an example of what a typical MPP would look like. Again, that's that binder that's on site, and this is where you would get that information from. So as you scroll down there, it's going to give you the date, and it's going to give you the plan preparer, the name, the company. That's what that typically looks like. You can get some more information from here. You can get the license number, but we'll show you where that is too. And again, they're not looking for attachments of this. They're just looking for you to fill out the date and the preparer's name. So let's go back to attachment A. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to actually create a new PDF for, the name of that PDF, you're going to label it as A2 Legionella sample, and then we'd recommend putting your building name as well. And so what they're looking for here is they're looking for the actual reports that come from the lab that show that you have had Legionella samples collected every 90 days. Again, and they're telling you since the date of that last inspection. In this case, that was that November 2019 date. So your Legionella report, it's going to look different depending on which lab issues it, but typically it's going to be on some letterhead. We've redacted some information here. They're looking for every Legionella sample report within the last, operational period. So again, these are required every 90 days. So you're going to want to pay attention to two things here. You're going to want to pay attention to the date and make sure that you have, that you do have a sample for every 90 days. And then the other thing you want to pay attention to is the results. Hopefully all of the results are none detected. If you did have an elevated Legionella, bacteria sample, rest assured that they are going to then look to make sure that the corrective actions were taken. So corrective actions, if you had an elevated Legionella sample, would be your cleaning and disinfection and your resampling. So while all they're looking for attachment-wise is the sample report, again, you're just going to want to make sure that if there were elevated samples, that the corresponding corrective actions are also submitted. And I'll show you how that goes. So let's go back to attachment A. Okay, so that was the first PDF you were going to put together was A2. The next is A3, it's compliance inspection. Like the Legionella sample, your compliance inspection is done every 90 days. Now, don't confuse this with the weekly inspection that your on-site person does. That is separate. This is that actual 90-day inspection requirement that's done by your qualified person. So, most typically your water treatment vendor. Every 90 days is going to come in. They're going to do a complete compliance inspection. You're also going to have a compliance inspection when you start the cooling tower. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but remember that that thought. If you'll notice back there, we actually had 54 pages attached for this particular PDF. That's because some vendors, they will do compliance inspections more often than 90 days. If they're on site every 30 days, they might end up doing a full inspection, which is smart because then you're not gonna miss your 90 days, because if you miss that 90 days, you're in violation. So every cooling tower inspection report is scanned and inserted into this A3 PDF attachment, and we're going to go ahead and submit that as one of our attachments.
So Leah, for A2 and A3, where do we actually find these records?
So that's a good question. Ideally, you're supposed to have these records on site. So if the inspector came on site today, they would want to see your operational binder, and they would expect to see all of these records in that binder. So whatever your process, your internal process is, typically these reports are going to come to you, via email. In the case of Vitralogy, we have a virtual binder. Everything is online. We don't have an actual paper binder. So as these documents come into us via email, we're going to go ahead and file them. But hopefully your on-site, paper logbook has some sort of tabbing system that kind of looks like this. On the left-hand side here, this is how we organize our virtual binder. If the DOH inspector were to come on site, they would actually take the inspection. They would review all the records in this virtual binder, and we have everything categorized, the way they're looking for. So down there on the bottom, you could see the 90-day Legionella test, the 90-day inspection. Hopefully your on-site paper binder, as you were collecting and receiving these inspection reports, they should be in that on-site binder. So another action step, it's a good time to audit your record keeping. It's a good time before you get the inspection request to take a look at what you have on site. And see what's in there and what's missing. I can tell you from Vitralogy's standpoint, we audit these virtual binders on a weekly basis to make sure that nothing's missing, because it's only as good as what you put in there. So another action step, just get familiar with your your logbook.
Okay.
So let's go back to attachment A. Okay. And you'll see on the right side there, they're asking you to fill in the number of pages. So after you collect all of those compliance inspections, you're going to count the number of pages, and you're going to tell them that in that PDF attachment labeled A3 compliance inspection, they can expect to find 54 pages. Okay, A4 is just the cleaning. You're going to give them a record of each cleaning. Again, performed since the date of the last inspection. Keep that date in mind. You should have a cleaning certification from your your vendor. You're just going to take that. It should have a date on it. You're going to put that into a PDF labeled A4 cleaning, and that's the attachment for that. For that category. A5 is a little different. Disinfection, there's a few things we want to call out here. So they're going to ask you for, every disinfection that was performed. They're also asking you here for the 7G applicator certification number. So that should be on the, usually it's on when you get the receipt that the tower was disinfected, it typically has that 7G applicator license number on it. Chris, do we have an example of what A5 looks like? Yeah, so this is certifying that the cooling tower here was disinfected on April 24th, and then on the bottom there, it lists out the license number. So that's gonna satisfy the disinfection. Another new thing that the DOH initiated for 2020 was they kind of did an emergency mandate that required every cooling tower to have an additional disinfection. They call it a summertime hyperhalogenation, and they required that the cooling tower was disinfected sometime in the month of July or August. Summer is typically the time where you're at risk for Legionnaires outbreaks. The water, the temperature of the water is prime for Legionella bacteria growth. And they have decided that starting in 2020 and every year going forward, not only are you going to have to perform the disinfection, but you're going to have to fill out, the vendor that performed the disinfection has to fill out this form here. It's called a Declaration of Summertime Hyperhalogenation. You should have received this. You should have already uploaded it to that DOH portal. So when you are taking your time to take a look at your DOH portal, your cooling tower portal, take a look at the attachments and make sure that this declaration of summertime hyperhalogenation is attached there. But in addition, they're also going to want you to submit it for your virtual inspection.
Okay.
So that's what that looks like. Okay. Okay, so A6 biocide, this is a little interesting. Since they're not on site and taking a look at the actual chemicals, what they're asking you to do is to take a photograph of the EPA pesticide label for every biocide used. This is coming directly from the chemical vats. So I think we have an example of what this is going to look like. So if you have 3 tanks that hold chemicals, you're going to submit 3 photographs of the entire label. I will tell you that they have come back at us and asked for clearer pictures. Like, I understand that this isn't super clear, you can't really read the fine print. It's more about getting the whole label, which is a little tricky because if you think about it, these chemical vats, I mean, they could be in a corner, I've seen them like under piping. All I can say is do your best to, get that camera close and get a picture of the full the full label, and you're going to attach those. So again, in this case, there were 3 tanks. We have 3 photographs
Great.
of the chemical labels. A7 is a little different. In this case, this is the only one. They're not asking you to go all the way back to the date of the last inspection. They're only asking you for the last 30 days, the last 30 days that the cooling tower was operating. So obviously, if it's a seasonal tower and we received this request this week, it was not operating in the last 30 days. You're going to go back to 30 days from the shutdown date, and just provide them with the record of the water treatment. That sometimes it comes from a controller report, sometimes it's in the inspection. But if you're uncertain of that, reach out to the water treatment vendor. And again, they're only looking for weekly the date and time and amount for the last 30 days. And that would be that separate attachment. So we've made our way through the attachments. I had mentioned before to kind of keep an eye on those cleaning and disinfection and Legionella samples. And the reason is, believe it or not, your seasonal towers are actually a lot more work than your annual towers are. Seasonal towers have a startup procedure, and startup's right around the corner. I actually just noticed that the DOH sent out some guidance on what those startup procedures look like. I will tell you that aside from corrective actions, meaning if you had that elevated Legionella sample to prove that you took the corrective actions, by far the thing that we've seen the most follow-up requests for, or historically violations issued, they really take a deep dive into what the startup records and startup procedure looks like. So with each startup, you need to have a cleaning, a disinfection, and a Legionella sample pulled within 14 days of the tower starting. So interestingly, what we found was that like before, when we were showing you the disinfection, there was a disinfection certification from April, and startup was so April 14th, and startup was April 13th, and it seems to have fulfilled that requirement. But what we found was that they pushed back when we submitted this, and they asked us to submit proof of disinfection for startup, and we said we did. It's under A5 disinfection. What we just realized, best practice, give it to them twice. Include the disinfection, include it again in the startup records. We don't have it on this particular because this happens to be an annual tower. So here you could see we clicked off, checked off that the system is continuously operated, meaning there was no startup. But if you have a startup, compile those startup records. They're telling you right there, the Legionella sample, the cleaning, the disinfection. Take that from those other categories and just attach it again so that it's readily available to the inspector that's that's doing this for you.
So it's better to attach it too many times.
In this case, yes. Sometimes you don't want to give them everything. You don't want to give them more than what they're asking for. Certainly fulfill your requirements and that's it. But in this case, giving them the same information in multiple places, it's just going to make it's going to make their inspection easier, and it's going to let you avoid the hassle of possibly having to answer questions, even though it was there in the first place.
Okay.
So, a tidbit of something that we found pretty often. So our standard now is to do it twice. And then finally, A9 is asking you to certify the most recent startup and shutdown dates. Again, this is an annual tower. If it's an annual tower, you just put in not applicable. But if it was a seasonal tower, you would let them know for 2020 what your shutdown date, what your startup date was. Then you are going to give your name, your title, your company. You're going to certify. Again, this can be done on behalf. In this case, this is, a Vitralogy employee that filled it out on behalf. So it doesn't have to be signed and certified by the person who received that initial email. It just needs to be signed, dated, and submitted back.
Okay. Yeah, that's a lot of information. And you're saying that has to be submitted within that 7-day window?
It has to be submitted within 7 days. So it's really the reason why we kind of, put this out there, like let you know what to expect, because there's going to be some work involved here. Just listen, just aggregating, scanning and formatting, all these various PDFs is work, and that's in the ideal situation that you have all of these records readily available. So, again, it's really why we're giving you a deep dive. I know it's a lot of information, but just understand what they're looking for. And if you start now, at least understanding where you are, do you have access to records? You can't completely fill it out now because, especially if you have like an annual tower, because if you don't get audited for another, 6, 8, 12 weeks, you're going to be missing out on 6, 8, 12 records. But, at least you have an idea of, this is how much they're looking for. It's a big project.
Yeah, it's a lot of information. And what happens if you don't have all the documents that they're asking for?
So that's a good question. I'll tell you, to the best of your ability, gather everything that you can, and submit, as much as you can. So we have seen where they've sent follow-up requests. We've submitted a package, and then and this is discretionary. They do not have to do this, but we've seen where you get another email, this time from an actual like individual inspector, and he or she will say, please provide additional records, and they'll tell you, they'll know what's missing, if you're missing a sample, or, and sometimes they might ask you, and that's a great scenario because then you have the opportunity to, to get that. All I can say is fill out that attachment A, grab as much information as you can. They certainly appreciate following directions. If you're formatting and you're following the, what they're asking for, that goes far. And keep your date in mind. Just make sure that you're submitting, at the very least, your attachment A and as much, corresponding documentation as you can within that 7-day time frame.
Yeah. Do you mind, I know you briefly showed that email for our response, but do you mind just showing how we should format and submit the documents again?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's take a look at that again. So now that we went through each of these, you can see that this is how we're gonna send it back. We're sending it to that DOH website. We're subject line referencing the system ID number. And then on top there, you see the first thing that we're attaching is that actual attachment A that we filled out is going to be attached. And then there you can see each one of those categories that we just went through. There's a separate PDF created. And if you were to open that, you would see all of that corresponding, like we just showed you, those documents. So all of the, all of those compliance inspections are attached within that one PDF. And then,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. So what you've done here is you've created a binder. This is, these are your tabs. These are your, you just recreated what they would expect to see on site. But you're aggregating and formatting, and now you're submitting to them so that they can dive in and do their inspection from this instead of that binder.
And then after you submit all of these documents, how quickly should we expect to hear back?
Okay, so that's a good question. In this case, no news is good news. Don't expect to get any confirmation that they received it. We were a little surprised by that. We assumed, like initially we were like reaching out like, hey, we sent you a lot of stuff, and kind of like, yeah, okay, I can tell you that if it does seem to be that they are inspecting this rather quickly after receiving it. And I can tell you that because when we've gotten the opportunity to provide more information, when they've emailed us to request more information, it's usually within a week of when we submitted, which tells us they're, pretty quickly taking this package and performing the inspection. So, if they were to request information, it's usually pretty quickly. Other than that, it's kind of a hurry up and wait. It's sort of been like no news is good news. And eventually, and I say eventually because we've seen it, 4 weeks, and then we've seen it like 8 or 12 weeks, 12 weeks later.
Oh, wow.
But eventually you will receive another email, and that one is going to have an inspection report attached to it. So I think we have an example of what that email looks like. So this is a copy directly of what that email looks like. This time is coming from the Office of Building Water Systems Oversight, and it's going to have an attachment to it. The attachment is the actual inspection report. I want to point something out here, a little bit more news, but if you weren't aware, the DOH has changed their inspection process. Prior to 2020, the on-site inspection would be performed, and then you would receive an inspection summary report. That summary report detailed everything that they found and everything that they didn't find. So if you were missing things on site, if you were missing reports, Legionella samples, weekly work, they would lay that out for you. And you would have a cure period. You would have an opportunity then to say, no, wait, I do have that. I didn't have it on site. I didn't print it out, whatever. I can still submit it. They have taken that away. This was even pre-COVID. This was as of January. The training wheels are off, and it is now a single inspection report, which means the violations are already issued. So where it used to be the inspection summary report and then the violation deficiency report, it's combined now. It goes right to a single inspection report that lists out the violations. And going forward, the only way, unfortunately, to address missing documentation would be through the actual oath hearing. So I have a picture of what that inspection report looks like. So this is the final inspection report. This is the end game, what you're going to finally get back. Hopefully we're going to see all zeros there. This is telling us that we have no violations. And it's just going to give you some standard comments. If you were to have violations, they would be noted here, and then they would break it down and let you know what all of those, what each violation was for. After that, you wait for an oath hearing date.
So you're saying they can actually issue fines off of these audits?
They can. That's the whole purpose of them, is to to fully perform that inspection, including calling out any violations and issuing violations based off of it.
And what happens if you happen to miss the email and you don't respond to the audit?
At all. Yeah. So again, this is why it's so important to make sure that that you're the one that's listed there. We have seen where sometimes where they have reached out again and given you a warning that they didn't receive anything. They'll kind of just resend that initial email. Again, that's assuming that you are the right person, that the right email is there. In that case, they're not giving you an extra 7 days. They're telling you missed it. Still quickly assemble as much as you can and submit it. And we have seen that they've done that. The other thing though is that you might just get an inspection report like we just saw, and it's going to have violations for every single one of those categories in that attachment A.
Wow.
You're in violation of every single category. And that's, those are civil fines. Those fines are going to be $6,000, $8,000, $9,000. And it also goes by offense. So if it's your first offense, it's one price. If it's a second offense, they have the opportunity to double the violation. So it's important. It's the reason why we're really, taking as much time as we have to, to dive into what's required here.
Yeah. So it seems really vital to double check who's listed as the owner, and then just double check your inbox a couple times to make sure you didn't receive it, or if you did receive it.
Correct.
And Leah, how can we prepare ahead of time? I know you've sprinkled in some tips, but just to give a summary.
Yeah, so the biggest takeaway is to check your record keeping. Obviously, I can't stress enough, go into that registry portal, make sure that you, first of all, make sure you have your right password, that you can get into it, make sure that the email is correct, take note of your startup and shutdown dates, be aware of who the players are, who is the qualified person, who's the responsible person. You could always take the photos of that biocide label ahead of time. I think it's an important reminder that there are a lot of moving pieces, there are a lot of time sensitivities, and clearly a lot of record keeping. But definitely start with that action plan that we gave you. There's FAQs, there's links to where you need to go to find this information. And so there are certainly things that you can do to prepare ahead of time.
Okay, and you mentioned an attachment B. Can we see what that is quickly?
Sure, real quick. Attachment B is it's basically a mechanical overview. If you scroll down to the bottom there, the cooling tower equipment, this is going to be stuff that you already should have provided when you registered the cooling tower. This is on that cooling tower portal. It looks like the DOH is taking the opportunity while they have you to update their records and to even get some more information from you. Now they're going into, do you have a chiller, or even do you have a BMS system? You have 60 days to return this. There are no violations associated with this. Fill it out to the best of your ability. You might want to consult with your mechanical vendor, if you don't have the information. Again, it's not as crucial, but I will tell you that they will keep asking you for it. So if you don't submit it within 60 days, they're going to send you out a few reminders. So it is something that you're going to want to, but this is more, to the best of your ability, fill this out. And
okay. And do you expect after these COVID restrictions to be lifted that these virtual inspections will still continue?
So that's a good question. These are not going to replace the in-person inspections, because on site, they're believe it or not, they're diving even more into your records. They're not asking in this virtual request, they're not asking for any of your weekly records. You might notice if they were to do an on-site inspection, they're going that much further into your weekly records. They're also collecting a Legionella sample. The DOH is collecting their own Legionella sample. So this isn't going to replace the on-site inspections. That being said, I don't see them getting rid of this remote inspection either. I think it just, it's a very good way for them to keep on top of things, the DOH, update their records, and at the end of the day to, increase the inspection frequency. The last I heard, there was 140 field scientists that are going out into the field to do the inspections. Obviously, if you're sending this information and they are remotely auditing, they can vastly increase the number of inspections performed. So unfortunately, like many of the regulatory components surrounding local law 77 and 76, it looks like this is just going to be another addition.
So it's good to be prepared for both.
Yep.
Well, Leah, thank you for all this information. This was some really good information you provided, and I know we're going to be sending out the follow-up transcript and action plan. In the meantime, if anyone has questions for the last minute before we end this presentation, feel free to drop that in the chat. And then Leah, how can people reach out to you directly if they need more help?
Yeah, so please feel free to reach out. I know it was a lot of information. You know, I think you have a really good sense now of what to do with that form. But if you have more questions about the cooling tower registry portal or just best practices in general, my information is on the screen. It will be on that that follow-up report. And LinkedIn is always a good way to connect as well.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. It doesn't look like there's any questions, but I appreciate all the information that you provided.
Thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.